Jake Curtis from Institute for Reforming Government is joining me this morning to chat. Good morning, Jake. How are you?
Good. How are you, Meg?
Good, thanks. Did you ever watch Fantasy Island, or is that just...
I thought you were gonna bring that up. You're gonna have to, I've heard of it. I can't say I've ever watched it.
Oh, I sort of date myself when I say that, but yeah, it was one of those
Maybe.
and I didn't really I didn't do a whole lot on the weekends. It was like probably like a Saturday night show or something, and it was right after The Love Boat. So or maybe it was a
Yeah.
Friday night. I don't know. I can't remember, but yeah,
I
my
think that was a
parents...
little before my time.
Yeah,
But
well, my parents were really strict, and so I didn't get to go out all the time. So I don't know if that was when I was in high school or anyway. But yeah, I'm dating myself by saying that, but I still remember the whole "Smiles, everybody," and that was sort of the...
smelling's good.
Yes, it is. And despite our losses last Tuesday, we have to continue to smile, and we need to figure out how to brush ourselves off and pick ourselves up by the bootstraps and go on and focus on what we can do better to win in the future.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think this is a good intro because last week, I think it's fair to say I certainly was bleary eyed, and pretty well. Look, faith and family is always the most important thing. So I certainly try to keep things in perspective. But look, it wasn't a great night. And there's a lot of, I think, questions for the center right movement in the state of Wisconsin as far as how we move forward. I think there's a lot of groups that are going to have to reassess how they get involved in races like this, in particular statewide judicial elections. These are unique races. These are not gubernatorial races. These are not legislative races. They're very unique. They are statewide. There are certainly some elements that are similar to a gubernatorial race, but you're running for the state's highest court. And I think for those groups that get involved in these races, just like you do with any organization, just if you're into sports, after a loss, you got to reassess. Frankly, even after a win, you identify the things you did well and the things you need to improve upon. And certainly after a loss like this, I think everybody is in agreement. We have to kind of reassess how we run these races. And I know we're going to get into this, but in particular, the messaging that we rely on, the polling that's conducted. I mean, there needs to be, we need to basically, as I think I said last week, we need to burn the playbook that we've been using. And we basically have 8 months to put together a new playbook. Because remember, the good Bradley, Justice Rebecca Bradley, is up in 26. She is already basically announced she's going to run to defend her seat. And as we all know, that campaign really gets going basically December into January, and then it's a 3-month sprint. So, we can't be creating the game plan, the playbook, in December. That work has to start now for the center-right movement.
Amen to that. In fact, you were just talking about winning. I remember, and you got to adopt this attitude, having grown up in Minnesota and being formerly a Minnesota Vikings fan. I can remember, and my parents had season tickets, and I can remember my parents having words with one another, and my mom would say, my dad's name was John, and my mom would say, "John, winning isn't everything." And then he'd say, "It's the only thing." And, it's kind of like, yeah, that's kind of true in politics too.
Well, look, if you believe, you have to start from some basic principles, certainly, and I think that's why groups like IRG are so critical, because we kind of lay the foundation for the conservative movement, and then it's up to the political leaders, the policy makers. We're heading into an election cycle for governor and attorney general. The individuals that step forward to run for those offices, we're not going to get involved in primaries and things like that, but we absolutely want to provide kind of that the foundational principles so that they can then take that work product and go out and sell it to the public. We want to provide the ideas, and obviously the other groups, Will, McIver, Wisconsin has a very robust kind of ecosystem of center-right groups. And again, I'm proud to be at IRG, one of those groups that I think produces really good work product. And kind of going back to the Supreme Court race, we are going to continue to focus on our Court Watch project because, in a weird way, it's almost more important now that there's a progressive majority for at least the next 3 years. Had Judge Schimmel won, it frankly would have been a little different. Admittedly, probably a little easier of a project because we would have just highlighted the good cases that the court was putting out. To the extent they ever put out a bad decision, we would certainly highlight that as well. But the reality is now we're going to have a lot of work, and our project is going to be really critical because I think it's fair to say, hopefully it's not as bad as everybody's predicting, and we certainly have made some predictions, but if it is, there needs to be somebody there to highlight that, and that's what we're going to do at IRG. We want to highlight the decisions that are problematic, and we want to really make clear what it means to have an activist judiciary and how it's going to impact the policies that, frankly, a lot of our polling shows Wisconsinites still clearly support, whether it's not just school choice, it's education freedom. You and I have talked about the work even a couple of weeks ago that we did in the homeschool space where we highlighted Susan Crawford's husband writing a book essentially about how to undermine homeschooling nationwide. And that got a huge response. There's 30,000 kids in the state that are homeschooled. So it's not just school choice. We kind of refer to it as just like that education freedom. Parents should have all the tools in their toolbox to educate their kids. We homeschool our kids, but we know many families where one kid maybe goes to traditional public, one goes to private, one is homeschooled. That's kind of the environment we're in. Kind of the one size fits all when it comes to education does not work. Families need options, and so if we have a court that's going to undermine that, look at what's happening in Illinois. Not the judiciary, but the legislature is putting the screws to homeschool families in Illinois. I believe it's HR 2827. I put it up on my Twitter account that imposing real strenuous obligations on the part of homeschool families. So this is happening, and so we now need to be on the watch here in Wisconsin, not only for bad moves in the legislature, because certainly we have a much more energetic Democratic base in the legislature. We're going to highlight bad ideas, and if there's bad ideas from Republicans, we're going to highlight those as well. But again, specifically for purposes of our court watch, we are going to watch closely what this court does when it comes to Act 10. And, Meg, you and I have talked about this ad nauseum for the last 4 months, all the problems with the Act 10 litigation. It's currently it's out of Dane County. It's been appealed to District 2, which is a conservative-leaning county, court of appeals based in conservative Waukesha County. So we're going to watch that case closely. I'm not optimistic. We've talked about education freedom. There's so many issues. Voter ID is now a little interesting now that it's enshrined in the Constitution, but we certainly want to watch that. And then the one that, frankly, and this would probably be my biggest criticism of kind of how this campaign was operated, I think Judge Schimmel worked hard, and with the help of outside groups, he had funding. I think this came down to messaging. And kind of the fourth thing I was going to mention was the business climate. We talked about the business climate, all the great reforms that were enacted during the Walker era. I think a strategic plaintiff, progressive plaintiff, could certainly come up with some attacks against Act 2 and some of the other acts that were implemented during the Walker era that made it a very positive business climate so we could actually be a pro-growth state. I think those are at risk as well. So at IRG, we are going to watch those closely and make sure that to the extent this new progressive majority or permanent, I guess, for the next 3 years, progressive majority issues bad decisions, we want to highlight those and explain those to the public so that, again, heading into 26, people realize how important it is to at least defend the Justice Bradley seat.
All right. So question for you. What do you think the Supreme Court is going to take up first? What do you suspect?
Well, like I just mentioned, Act 10 is already in the pipeline, so to speak. Remember, back in July of last year and then December of last year, there were essentially two decisions that were issued by Judge Frost out of Dane County that essentially applied kind of an equal protection analysis and really watered down the rational basis review that we have in the state. And again, we're going to talk about those issues. On a lot of the political consultants and even some people on talk radio say, "Well, you can't talk about these legal principles." We're going to, because we want to explain to the public how it's one thing just to say we're going to have a super legislature and an activist court. Well, we're going to explain to people how the left is actually going to do that and how we can push back. So again, just a real quick primer: rational basis review is essentially kind of the standard that a court's going to apply when there's a challenge to a legislative determination, a legislative act, and unless there's essentially no rationale for the act, a court is going to defer to that legislative determination. Well, so that's where you can kind of see how they're going to weaponize this principle. You start to water that principle down such that courts are going to really scrutinize legislative acts and not try to find any way to uphold it, but frankly to try to find any way to strike it down. Well, that's going to be the path to undoing really all the Walker-era reforms. And so Act 10 is the first big one. And again, I mean, this isn't like some hot take. It's already being litigated. So procedurally, like I said, there were decisions last year, July and December, from Judge Frost that watered down rational basis review, that basically said there was no rationale for the legislature back in 2011 to have essentially carved out certain protective occupation participants, otherwise known as law enforcement, that there was no rationale for that. Therefore, it's an equal protection violation under the Wisconsin Constitution, not the federal Constitution, which is important because there's a lot of case law that's upheld Act 10. Some of it was a Seventh Circuit, and so this is a unique challenge under the Wisconsin Constitution. So that now has been appealed to, like I said, District 2, which is based out of Waukesha. Definitely of the four, we have four courts of appeal in Wisconsin. District 1 is Milwaukee County. District 2 is the 12 surrounding counties in southeast Wisconsin that surround Milwaukee County. District 3 is basically the northern half of the state. And then basically the southwestern quarter is District 4, including Dane County. So this case is in District 2. It's likely we'll see a reversal of the Judge Frost Dane County decision, and then that'll obviously get appealed to the Supreme Court. I guess I'm not tracking it closely enough procedurally to know when we could expect a decision. Let's say you get a decision from District 2 within the next month or so, that would be quickly appealed to the Supreme Court. So late summer, early fall, I mean, don't hold me to this, but if you want a rough timeline of when we could see a decision, that's maybe when you see an Act 10 decision. And the problem is going to be, again, this is a challenge. There's not a federal claim here. This is under the Wisconsin Constitution. So I don't want to say it's impossible, and certainly there may be some litigators from Will and other places that will have a stronger opinion on this, but I don't really see a strong likelihood that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to bail us out. And I think we have too many people that just assume that, well, these state elections don't matter because we have a strong conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, if there's not a federal claim, it's almost certain that the U.S. Supreme Court is not going to take a case up. And so the problem is when you have a very activist majority that's focusing on state constitutional claims, really the court of last resort is your Supreme Court in your state, and that's why these elections are just so critical. And I know there are folks out there, and we may weigh into this at some point, that are starting to wonder, like, if we're going to have elections where there's literally over $100 million. I mean, I hope people realize this was the most expensive state Supreme Court election in U.S. history, not just in Wisconsin history, in U.S. history. And got to start wondering, like, is this the system that we want to elect judges and justices in the state? I, about 10 years ago, was strongly supportive of that. The problem is, I think the system really has become distorted, and I think it's worth a conversation at some point.
I worry that myself. Is it precedent setting? Is this what it's going to be like? And what do we anticipate? I mean, isn't the good Bradley up for election? And wasn't it just announced that she was going to run for reelection? And I mean, what are they going to try on her?
Correct.
Ugh.
Yeah. So Justice Rebecca Bradley's up. So again, it's April 9th. People need to realize in 8 months we're going to have another. That election's going to really start. You're going to start to see ads, and then I hate to break it to everybody, but then after that, in 2027, it's Justice Annette Ziegler, another strong conservative. I hope she runs for re-election. That's the best shot we have, is with strong justices like Bradley and Ziegler, that they decide to do it for another 10-year term, which is a lot to ask of these people. These are long terms. But boy, if that's an open seat, we're going to have real problems. And so that's why, I guess taking it back to strategy, I think the polling that IRG did was really important. And we're, I guess, willing to, talk more openly about, and obviously the polling we did was public, but we want to point out, if you track our polling, and some folks dismissed it, but they did so kind of at their peril. Our initial polling had Judge Schimmel up, and that was in January. He was winning in January. However, shortly after that, negative TV ads started to come on, and you could see kind of that drop. And then by late February, our polling had the race shifted and Judge Schimmel losing by 7 points. No other polling really had that track record like we did in this race. And so, again, I'm just pointing it out, that there are groups like IRG out there that we're not getting involved in the politics, but we're putting out we're putting out good polling. We're putting every week, and frankly, other than talk radio, it was kind of disappointing. I don't know if the campaign or other groups picked up on our primers, but other than you guys, every week we were putting out a primer focusing on important issues that, frankly, if people connected the dots between our polling and the primers, we were focusing on the issues that people in polling indicated was really critical for them. And that's why, again, I don't mean this to be like a criticism of Judge Schimmel. I think he ran hard.
Right.
He's a good man. And the funding came in from various outside groups. So, if we're looking at the variables, what's the variable that doesn't seem to work? What in my mind, and I'm gonna stick to this unless somebody really can convince me otherwise. If you have a good candidate who's working hard, and you have the money, and you have the infrastructure, what's the variable that's not working? It's the actual messaging.
Yep.
And so when you have a campaign, and again, these consultants, I know many of them. Some of them are friends. And campaigns need consultants, but we're running the wrong playbook. We're constantly being told, when you run these races, you have to run them on law and order and public safety. Well, everybody supports that. And frankly, the left, starting with Justice Dallet, has been very effective at, if not neutralizing that issue, actually winning on that issue. And this, frankly, could be the most egregious example, where you have a uber progressive out of Dane County who really has no track. I mean, she claimed she worked. I mean, she did work at the DOJ, but I think it was like Medicare fraud. I mean, she was not a prosecutor, which, that's fine if that's not part of your track record. But somehow she claimed to be this tough on crime individual when she has an extremely progressive record, and somehow in her ads claimed that the former district attorney from Waukesha County and attorney general, who had, I think, 70 out of 72 sheriffs endorsing him, was somehow soft on crime. It was frankly masterful from a political standpoint. And how we lost that messaging, it's just beyond me. But that tells me, we're just running the wrong playbook. we should have been hitting her hard on voter ID. I mean, she litigated one of the key challenges to voter ID in 2011 to 2012, I believe, on behalf of the League of Women Voters. She's on the record calling voter ID a poll tax. She has made her views on Act 10 known. As I mentioned, her husband clearly is not supportive of education freedom. So you got to question kind of where she is at on that issue.
Yeah, he hated
You just go down,
homeschoolers. I mean, that's the bottom line.
right. So you go down the line, and then you look at the polling, and this is the issue. These are the issues that individuals that the individual voters care about. I never saw an ad about education freedom. I never saw an ad about the business climate. I never saw an ad about voter ID or Act 10.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, heck, I'm a member of a gun club, in the Guard, own several firearms. I never saw anything on the Second Amendment. I mean, I don't know how that happened in an election where, again, the money is just pouring in. So we need to, I guess the one maybe campaign tactic, and I'm not a campaign expert, but I don't know how we don't micro-target people. I mean, every homeschooler in the state should have been getting a flyer or some sort of digital advertisement relating to, Susan Crawford's husband. Every member of a gun club should have been getting some sort of advertisement, digital or otherwise, relating, to Second Amendment issues. Every business owner. I mean, so I was just talking to somebody yesterday at a Federal Society event. How did every business owner in this state not get contacted and note? Again, what we talked about at IRG, we were Alabama, the North, during the Shirley Abramson years, because of all the just horrible decisions relating to liability for small businesses, manufacturers. It became a trial lawyer haven. How was that not part of the messaging? So sorry to get fired up, but I mean,
I know.
I'm not saying we had all the answers. And again, it's not our job to do politics. We put out kind of the thought pieces, and these weren't long. These were 2 pages, Meg. I get it. Like sometimes the think tanks, they'll put out a 50-page report and be shocked that nobody reads it. These were 2-page primers with case law cited. They were great tools, and I guess there's a sense of frustration because other than talk radio, I don't know who else picked up. So thank you to you and Jay and Vicki and the others that picked these up. But frankly, we're kind of preaching to the choir when we talk to you. We need these outside groups and these political folks to start thinking about, do we just run the same playbook, law and order, public safety, that frankly has not won? Really, 2019, Justice Hagedorn, that was the last time a center-right candidate has won. And even there, and people have pointed out, remember that election. How did he win? He won, frankly, because the left attacked him, and essentially for his faith. And that's really what fired up the base. So it wasn't even you can make the argument that the kind of the law and order public safety playbook was not what won that race in 2019. And with the exception of 2019, we have not won a race for a long time.
I 100% agree with everything you said. And I mean, it's about, the 2 axioms in politics that never change: candidates matter and issues matter. And we didn't get the messaging about the issues correct. And that's really what motivated those on the left to go out. But you're right. I mean, I kept thinking about, shoulda, coulda, woulda. But all the different groups within the Republican Party that weren't targeted with their individual issues that matter most to them, that just didn't happen. You're
right.
Completely correct. I envision all of the, and this isn't a criticism of Brad Schimmel. I agree with what you said about great judge, really great guy. But I envision all of the ads or all of the even just campaign literature that I received. It's Judge Brad Schimmel flanked by law enforcement officers, and it obviously it didn't work.
Right. Well, and again, the reality is, the mechanics of these races. As the candidate, yes, ultimately he's the one that approves those ads and things like that. But 90% of his time is out there working the grassroots, working the fundraising circuit. So it's really incumbent upon these consultants and kind of the political class to make sure the right playbook is run. And again, ultimately, yeah, the buck stops with the candidate. But Brad Schimmel, as a candidate, doesn't have time to sit around all day long analyzing ads and wondering if it's the right one. He's going to look at an ad, he's going to approve it, and he's going to get on to the next event and go on to the next fundraiser. And that's the job of the candidate. And so the people that are helping, that's why, again, I want to make clear, like, I hope this is not viewed as overly criticizing the consultant class. Again, I know many of them. Some of them are good friends. And so I guess this should be positive encouragement. We all want to win. And if you're kind of part of that political class that's running this model based on one issue, my encouragement is to think about whether or not it's working. Clearly it's not, because we're not winning the races. So, okay, so what do we need to do to change that? I think we need to rethink kind of what our messaging is. And Meg, I think we do need to recognize too that when you look at kind of this change in demographics, and if you look at the kind of the Trump coalition, there's some problems there. I live in Ozaukee County. I've always argued, it's not just because it's my home county, it is ground zero for what is happening in the suburbs in the state of Wisconsin. When my wife and I moved to our house in 2009, I believe, right? You had the election of 2010. It was 67, 68% Walker. There were Walker signs everywhere. Fast forward to 2025, the spring election, Judge Schimmel received 51% of the vote in Ozaukee County. So, say at least over 15 years, basically a 15 to 18% drop in conservative support. And you can't really look at turnout, because Ozaukee County is one of those counties where we pretty consistently have very strong turnout. So the actual demographics have changed. Same thing can be said for some of these communities in Waukesha County, like Elm Grove. And so if we are going to make a trade for more rural outstate voters, for more maybe socioeconomically advanced suburban voters, and the suburban voters are coming out to vote and the rural voters are not, that is a fundamental demographic problem that we have to address. Right? In other words, let's just call them the Trump voters that are newer to the coalition. If they are only going to vote in presidential elections when President Trump is on the ballot,
we're in trouble.
That's not happening again, so we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And so we, again, coming back to the issues, that's why we're just going to beat this horse in the sense of just focusing on these kitchen table issues. You have to find a way to reconnect with these suburban voters that have, they're gone from the coalition right now. The fundamental question for the center-right movement going forward is, are they permanently gone? In other words, like, are they that voter that's either always going to vote progressive, or if for some reason they're really disillusioned with a progressive candidate, they just sit out, but will never vote for a conservative? Hopefully that's not the case. Because if it is, we're in a really bad spot. So we need to relook at the messages we run on in the hopes of getting some of those more higher educated suburban voters. Not that they're better, right? I love, frankly, in some ways, that we have become less elitist and more of a blue collar, common sense party. I think that's one of the benefits that Trump has brought to the party. But we also have to be realistic what that means from an electoral standpoint. It can cause issues if we're not also going to remember that those common sense reforms can still attract that higher educated suburban voter. And I would point to one issue, and then I'll stop here, is when the issue of biological boys and girls sports. I didn't see really much of that during this campaign cycle. And you talk to your average suburban mom, even if she, let's say she's kind of disillusioned with Trump, she still wants to protect her kids. Like that is a core issue that we have got to continue fighting on. And I know we've talked about this, Meg, but I'll reference it again. You had that situation, I believe it was last year in Sun Prairie, not a conservative area. We had an 18-year-old. I mean, legally, right? If the individual was 18 years old, he was a man, an adult, in a locker room with three 14-year-old girls, and there was an uproar naturally in Sun Prairie. And I always point to that as like that is an issue, even in a left-leaning school district. Like an administration is going to have a hard time defending that. And so those are the types of, that's a kitchen table issue. Protecting your kids is about as basic as it gets. And so those are the issues that we need to focus on to get some of those voters back.
Jay Curtis from Institute Reforming Government. Thanks for joining me this morning. I appreciate your time. Great conversation. Hope you have a good day.
Thanks, Meg.
I'll talk with you
to you
again.
next week.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.